Arab millionaire sees black factory worker who looks like his missing son. What he discovers destroys him. You're nothing but a useless factory worker. Get back to your place. Supervisor Jake Morrison's shout echoed across the Manhattan construction site, causing all the workers to stop and watch the public humiliation. Omar Johnson, 28, remained standing, holding an iron bar, his calm expression contrasting with the anger of the 45-year-old white man who stared at him with contempt. Mr. Morrison, I simply suggested a safer way to install these beams, Omar replied with dignity, even though he knew his response would only make matters worse. Suggested. Jake laughed sarcastically. A little black boy from the ghetto wants to teach engineering to men who've been in this business for decades. What a joke. On the other side of the construction site, watching through the windows of the administrative trailer, was Rashid Al-Mansouri, a 58-year-old construction magnate and owner of the largest real estate conglomerate in New York. His company, valued at $4 billion, was responsible for erecting the city's most imposing skyscrapers. But at that moment, all his attention was focused on the young man who had just been publicly humiliated. There was something about his face, his proud posture, even in the face of humiliation, that made his heart race in a way he hadn't felt in 25 years. Omar Johnson had grown up in the Bronx, the son of a single mother, managing to graduate with a degree in civil engineering through scholarships and night work. At 28, he was one of the few black men working on Manhattan construction sites, facing daily prejudice based on both his gender and his race. Rashid continued to watch, paralyzed. The way he moved his hands when explaining something to his colleagues, the way he tilted his head slightly when concentrating, even the way he tied his hair back with an old elastic band. All of it brought back memories he had buried decades ago. Mr. Al-Mansouri, the voice of his executive assistant Patricia, brought him back to reality. The board is waiting in the conference room. In a minute, Rashid muttered without taking his eyes off the window. Outside, Jake Morrison continued his public humiliation. Listen carefully, college prince. Here you do what I say. You carry what I order. And if you don't like it, you can look for another job. Omar took a deep breath, controlling the anger bubbling up inside him. He needed this job. After months of unemployment, he had finally landed a position at one of the largest construction companies in the city. He couldn't afford to fight back. Understood, Mr. Morrison, he said, swallowing his pride. Jake smiled maliciously. Great. Now go carry those bags of cement up to the 10th floor alone. And if you can't do it, you can leave today. The other workers looked down, embarrassed. They all knew it was impossible for one person to carry that much material up to the 10th floor. It was clearly a task designed to humiliate and force him to quit. Rashid clenched his fists. 25 years ago, his own daughter, Isla, had disappeared along with his ex-wife after a terrible argument. Isla was only 3 years old at the time with big, curious eyes, always asking how things worked. If he were alive today, his son, he would be exactly 28 years old, the same age as Omar. The resemblance wasn't just physical. It was that same intelligent stubbornness, that refusal to bow down to injustice even when the whole world seemed to be against him. Patricia, Rashid said suddenly, cancel the meeting. I need to inspect the construction site myself. But sir, the investors are cancel it, he repeated, already heading for the door. Outside, Omar had started carrying the bags of cement, determined to prove he could do it. His small but muscular body moved efficiently, but everyone knew it was a lost battle. Jake watched with a cruel smile, waiting for the moment when he would give up. What neither of them knew was that Rashid Al-Mansouri had kept a small child's bracelet engraved with the name Isla for 25 years, and that bracelet was on Omar Johnson's wrist at that very moment. If you're curious to find out the devastating connection between these two and want to know how a billionaire can completely change someone's life, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. What Rashid didn't know was that the humiliation he was witnessing on that construction site wasn't just random injustice. It was the painful echo of a story that began 25 years ago and was about to explode in a way that would destroy everything he believed he knew about his own past. Rashid walked down to the construction site with determined steps, watching Omar carry the third bag of cement by himself while Jake Morrison smoked a cigarette, clearly satisfied with the psychological torture he had created. The other workers pretended to be busy, but it was obvious they were uncomfortable with the situation. Morrison, Rashid called, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. Jake almost choked on his smoke when he saw the company owner walking toward him. Mr. Al-Mansouri, I didn't know you were inspecting today. Everything is under control here. Under control? Rashid glanced at Omar, who had stopped carrying and was watching them curiously. Explain to me why an engineer is doing manual labor while skilled workers stand around. Jake Pauled engineer, sir. She's just a Johnson MIT graduate with a specialization in structures. Rashid interrupted, having memorized his resume the night before after some detailed research. One of the best in his class, if I'm not mistaken. Omar looked at him in surprise. How did he know so much about him? Jake stammered some excuses, but Rashid wasn't listening anymore. His eyes were fixed on the bracelet Omar wore on his left wrist, a small gold chain with the name Isla engraved in Arabic. The world stopped. 25 years ago, he had given that bracelet to his 3-year-old daughter on her birthday. It was a one-of-a-kind piece custom-made by a Lebanese goldsmith in Detroit. When Isla and her mother disappeared after the argument, that bracelet was one of the things he missed most. Where did you get that bracelet? Rashid asked Omar directly, completely ignoring Jake. Omar instinctively touched the bracelet, a protective gesture he had made since childhood. It was my mother's. She said it was the only thing left of my father. Rashid felt his legs go weak. Your mother? What was her name? Yasmin Al-Mansuri Johnson, Omar replied, confused. But she changed her last name when she married my stepfather. Why are you asking? The silence that followed was deafening. Jake Morrison looked from one to the other, clearly lost, but realizing that something much bigger was going on there. The other workers had also stopped, sensing the tension in the air. Rashid struggled to maintain his composure. Yasmin, his ex-wife, the woman who had run away with his daughter after he had prioritized his business too much and neglected his family, the woman who had changed her name and disappeared without a trace. Patricia, he said into the radio, his voice shaking. Cancel all appointments for today, and I want you in my office in 5 minutes with all the files on employees hired in the last 6 months. Omar watched him with growing curiosity and a twinge of fear. Mr. Al-Mansuri, have I done something wrong? If it's about questioning Mr. Morrison's methods. No, Rashid said quickly. You didn't do anything wrong. We need to talk in my office now. Jake Morrison, feeling that he had completely lost control of the situation, tried to intervene. Sir, if I can explain what happened. You're fired, Rashid said without even looking at him. Grab your things and leave. Human Resources will contact you about the procedures. The entire construction site fell silent. Jake Morrison, the feared supervisor who had terrorized employees for years, had just been fired in a matter of seconds for humiliating the wrong person. Omar followed Rashid to the office, his heart pounding. On the way, he noticed how he was discreetly watching him as if trying to memorize every detail of his face. In the elevator, Rashid couldn't contain the question that was consuming him. Omar, do you know anything about your biological father? Not much, he replied, fidgeting nervously with his bracelet. My mother said he was an Arab man who abandoned her when I was very young. She never wanted to talk about him. She said it was too painful. Each word was like a stab in Rashid's heart. Yasmin had told him a completely different version of the story. In his version, she had run away with their daughter after an argument about him working too much. He had searched for them for years, hired private detectives, but never found any trace of them. Your mother, is she still alive? He asked, bracing himself for the answer. She died 2 years ago. Cancer, Omar said, his voice heavy with sadness. In her last days, she was delirious talking about a man named Rashid. She said she was sorry, that she should have told you the truth. The elevator reached the executive floor, but neither of them moved. Rashid was processing the information that Yasmin had died without ever giving him the chance to explain himself or meet the child he had raised. Patricia was waiting in the office with a thick folder. When they saw Omar enter with her boss, their surprise was evident. Patricia, Rashid said, I want a discreet DNA test. Today, sir. Patricia looked confused. Just do as I ask, he said, then turned to Omar. There's something I need to show you. As Rashid opened the secret safe in his office, his hands trembled, not only at the possibility of finding his long-lost child, but because he was about to discover that the version of his family's history he knew was only half the truth, and that the other half would change everything he thought he knew about himself. Rashid opened the desk safe in his office and took out a small blue velvet box. His hands trembled as he placed it on the table in front of Omar. "Before I open this, I need to tell you a story. A story about a man who worked so hard that he lost everything that really mattered." Omar looked at the box with curiosity mixed with apprehension. "Mr. Al-Mansuri, I don't understand what's going on." 25 years ago, Rashid began, "I was married to a woman named Yasmin. We had a 3-year-old daughter, a curious, stubborn girl who always questioned everything." He paused, looking directly into Omar's eyes. "A girl who wore a gold bracelet with her name engraved in Arabic." Omar instinctively touched his bracelet, his heart racing. "I worked 18 hours a day building this empire. I thought I was doing it for them, but in reality, I was running away from my responsibilities as a husband and father. One day, I came home and they were gone. Yasmin left only a note saying she couldn't live in that situation anymore." "That has nothing to do with me," Omar murmured, but his voice trembled. Rashid opened the box. Inside were photos of a small child, birth certificates, and a second bracelet identical to the one Omar wore. "I had 2 identical bracelets made, one for my daughter to wear, and one to keep until she grows up." Omar looked at the photos and felt the world spin. The child in the pictures had his eyes, his nose, his curious expression. "It can't be," he whispered. "Layla Al-Mansuri," Rashid said, his voice breaking. "That was your original name. You are my child or son, though the name Ayla is preserved." Omar stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "No, my mother told me that my father abandoned us, that he never cared about us." "I've been looking for you for 15 years, Rashid said, taking a thick folder out of the safe. "Private detectives, newspaper ads, rewards. I spent millions trying to find you." Yasmin changed her name, moved to another state, created a new identity. She didn't want to be found. Omar leafed through the documents with tears in his eyes. Detective reports, missing person posters, records of Rashid's travels across the country looking for them. Why did she lie to me?" "I don't know," Rashid admitted. "Maybe she wanted to protect you from the pain. Maybe she truly believed you'd be better off without me. I failed as a husband, Ayla. I failed as a father." At that moment, Patricia entered quietly. "Mr. Al-Mansuri, the lab has confirmed it. 99.97% compatibility. He is your child or son." The silence that followed was broken only by Omar's sobs. 25 years of resentment, of feeling abandoned, of carrying the last name of a stepfather who never fully accepted him. All of that came crashing down in a matter of minutes. "Jake Morrison," Rashid said suddenly, his voice turning cold as ice. "That supervisor who humiliated you. He has no idea who he was messing with." "You already fired him," Omar said through his tears. "Firing him is too good for him," Rashid replied, picking up the phone. "Patricia, I want you in the legal department now. Prepare a lawsuit for moral harassment, racial discrimination, and creating a hostile work environment against Jake Morrison, and investigate all other cases of discrimination he may have committed in recent years." "Sir," Patricia said, "that could cost the company millions in damages." "I don't care. I want every employee who has been harmed by him to be compensated. And I want Morrison's story to be made public as an example of what happens to those who discriminate in this company." Rashid turned to Omar. "For 25 years, you suffered because I wasn't the father I should have been. In recent months, you've suffered humiliation because people like Morrison think they can judge a person's worth by the color of their skin or their social background." He walked to the window, looking down at the construction site below. "But now, child, it's time for you to take your place. Not just in this company but in the world." "What do you mean?" Omar asked, still processing all the revelations. "I mean, you will no longer be a factory worker. Starting today, you are Omar Al-Mansuri, chief engineer and future heir to a $4 billion empire." Down below, Jake Morrison was being escorted off the construction site by security, carrying his belongings in a cardboard box. The other workers watched in silence, knowing they had witnessed something historic. And Omar asked, "Morrison is going to find out that discriminating against Rashid Al-Mansuri's child is the biggest mistake anyone can make in New York. When I'm done with him, no construction company on the East Coast will even think about hiring him." Patricia returned with the legal documents. "Mr. Al-Mansuri, The lawsuit is being prepared. We also found out that Morrison has at least 12 complaints of discrimination in previous jobs that were hushed up. Perfect. Rashid smiled coldly. Make sure this gets out. I want everyone to know what happens when someone messes with my family. But Rashid didn't know that his revenge against Morrison would only be the beginning. Because Omar, now knowing the truth about his origins, was about to make a discovery in his late mother's belongings that would reveal an even more devastating secret. Something that would not only change perceptions about the past, but would put the very future of the Al-Mansuri Empire at stake. 3 months later, Jake Morrison was sitting in a small apartment in Queens, staring at his empty bank account and a stack of job rejection letters. Omar's lawsuit had resulted in a $2 million settlement. But what really destroyed him was the public exposure. The story racist supervisor humiliates billionaire's child without knowing it had spread across social media and the news. His photo was everywhere as an example of workplace discrimination. No construction company wanted to associate its brand with a man who had become the national symbol of corporate prejudice. Across town, Omar walked the halls of Al-Mansuri Industries as the new vice president of operations. In the last few months, he had quickly adapted to the corporate world, implementing revolutionary diversity and inclusion policies that became a model for other companies. Mr. Al-Mansuri, said David Chun, a former construction site colleague and now security supervisor. The meeting with the investors is confirmed for 3:00 p.m. Omar smiled. He had insisted on promoting several colleagues from the construction site to leadership positions, proving the talent had nothing to do with a college degree or skin color, but with dedication and character. David, how many times do I have to tell you? You can call me Omar. We worked together carrying cement. Remember in his office, Rashid watched his son through the glass, proud of the strong and fair man he had become. In recent weeks, he had discovered the box of letters his mother, Yasmin, had written over the years, but never sent. The letters revealed the whole truth. Yasmin had run away, not because Rashid had abandoned her, but because she was afraid of his reaction when he found out she was pregnant again. She had lost the baby in the first weeks of her escape and ashamed and depressed decided it would be better to let Rashid believe they were dead. Dad, Omar said, entering the office. I just got the scholarship program reports. We already have 200 young people from disadvantaged communities studying engineering with our help. And Morrison, Rashid asked. He's still processing what happened. I hear he's working as a kitchen assistant in a restaurant in Queens. Omar showed no satisfaction, merely stating a fact. Sometimes people need to lose everything to understand the value of humanity. Rashid nodded. Revenge had been complete, but it had brought no joy, only justice. You know, he'll carry that lesson with him for the rest of his life. I hope so, and I hope other people see what happened to him and think twice before judging someone by their appearance. That afternoon during the meeting with investors, Omar presented the project that would change the face of Al-Mansuri Industries, a low-income housing program that would specifically employ people from marginalized communities, offering professional training and opportunities for growth. Gentlemen, he said to the room full of white men in suits, you are seeing living proof that talent is hidden everywhere. 3 months ago, I was a factory worker. You wouldn't have noticed on the street. Today, I'm leading billion-dollar projects. One of the investors raised his hand. Mr. Al-Mansuri, isn't it risky to hire people without traditional qualifications? The risk, Omar replied firmly, is continuing to ignore 70% of the population just because they weren't born with privileges. Jake Morrison had all the traditional qualifications. Look where that got him. 6 months later, Al-Mansuri Industries had become the most profitable and respected construction company in the country. Omar's model of inclusion was being copied by corporations around the world. Jake Morrison, meanwhile, had finally landed a job at a small auto repair shop in Brooklyn. His boss, a Dominican immigrant named Carlos, didn't know about his past and treated him with dignity. For the first time in months, Jake was learning what it meant to be judged by his character, not his social status. Maybe, Jake muttered to himself as he repaired an engine. I deserved everything that happened. In the Manhattan penthouse, father and son had dinner together every Friday, a tradition they had created to make up for lost time. On the wall of Rashid's office, next to his diplomas and business awards, was a simple framed photo. Omar on the construction site wearing a hard hat and smiling on the day he found him. Do you know what the biggest lesson I learned was? Rashid said looking at his son. What, Dad? That spending 25 years looking for you taught me more about humility than 30 years building an empire, and that you facing prejudice every day have become a better leader than I ever was. Omar took his father's hand. We both learned that family isn't about blood or money. It's about choosing every day to fight for each other and for those who need a voice. Omar's story proves that no matter where you were born or what color you are, your value is determined by your character and determination. If this story of overcoming adversity touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that show how justice always finds a way, even when it seems impossible. Rashid tried to build an empire based solely on financial success. But he discovered that his greatest wealth was in the child he thought he had lost forever. He learned that true leadership doesn't come from intimidating others, but from lifting them up. And that sometimes the people society underestimates the most are exactly the ones who can change the world if someone gives them a chance.